The rain drummed against my windshield as I pulled up to the downtown hotel. 43 years of driving, first taxis, now rideshares, and I thought I'd seen every type of passenger. The woman who slid into my backseat seemed ordinary enough. Mid-40s, elegant coat, tired eyes that spoke of long business trips. She gave me an address in the suburbs, then settled back with a soft sigh. "Rough day?" I asked, catching her reflection in the rearview mirror. She had that look people get when they're carrying something heavy. Not luggage, but memories. I'd learned to recognize it after decades of watching strangers navigate their private storms in the sanctuary of my car. "You could say that." Her voice carried a slight tremor, like someone fighting back tears. I saw someone today. Someone I never expected to see again." She paused, studying my face in the mirror with an intensity that made me uncomfortable. "You don't remember me, do you?" The question hit me like a physical blow. My hands tightened on the steering wheel as I pulled into traffic, my mind racing through decades of faces, voices, moments. There was something familiar about her, the way she tilted her head, the cadence of her speech, but I couldn't place it. "I'm sorry. I meet a lot of people in this job." She smiled then, a sad, knowing expression that seemed to carry the weight of years. "Michael Thompson." Still the same kind eyes. The sound of my own name from her lips sent a chill down my spine. "It's me, Michael. It's Sarah." And in that moment, as recognition crashed over me like a wave, I felt the tears begin to fall. If this story is touching your heart already, hit that subscribe button, because what happens next will change everything you think you know about second chances. Sarah Mitchell. The name echoed in my mind like a prayer I'd forgotten how to say. 26 years. 26 years since I'd last seen that face, heard that voice. My hands trembled as I navigated through downtown traffic, muscle memory keeping us safe while my world tilted off its axis. "Sarah," I whispered, the word barely audible over the engine's hum. "My God, Sarah." She was older now, of course. We both were. The bright-eyed college student I'd known had been replaced by this poised woman with silver threading through her dark hair. But those eyes, those impossibly green eyes that had haunted my dreams for decades, were unmistakably hers. "I wondered if you'd recognize me," she said softly. "It's been a long time." There was no accusation in her voice, no anger, just a profound sadness that made my chest ache. "I saw you at the hotel pickup area and I couldn't believe it. After all these years, all these cities, and here you are." I pulled over at the next red light, my vision blurred by tears I couldn't control. The businessman in the car next to us glanced over curiously, but I didn't care. Sarah Mitchell was in my car. The woman I'd loved more than life itself, the woman I'd lost in the most devastating way possible, was sitting 3 feet behind me as if the last 26 years had been nothing but a cruel dream. "I looked for you," I said, my voice breaking. "After the funeral, I looked everywhere. Your family said you'd moved away, that you didn't want to be found." The light turned green, but I couldn't move. Behind us, cars began to honk, but the sound seemed to come from another universe entirely. "I know you did." Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. "My sister told me. She said you came by the house every day for months." The admission hit me like a physical blow. She'd known. All these years, she'd known I'd tried to find her, tried to reach her in her grief. I finally pressed the gas, pulling through the intersection as horns blared around us. My hands were shaking so badly, I could barely grip the steering wheel. "Then why?" The question I'd carried for 26 years finally escaped. "Why didn't you let me find you? We could have helped each other. We both loved him." "Because I blamed you." The words were like ice water in my veins. "I know it wasn't fair. I know it wasn't right. But I blamed you and I couldn't face you. Every time I looked at your face, I saw his. You were his best friend, his roommate, his..." She trailed off, her voice catching. The silence stretched between us, filled with the ghost of a 19-year-old boy named David. My roommate, my best friend, her fiancé, the golden boy who'd had everything to live for and threw it all away on a rainy Tuesday night in April. The boy whose death had shattered both our worlds in different but equally devastating ways. "I should have been there," I said, the words I'd repeated to myself 1,000,000 times over the years. "If I hadn't gone home that weekend, If I'd stayed at the dorm like I usually did, maybe I could have stopped him. Maybe I could have seen the signs. Sarah leaned forward, and I could feel her presence like a physical weight. Michael, there were no signs. We've both spent 26 years learning that lesson the hard way. We drove in silence for several blocks, the familiar streets of downtown giving way to residential neighborhoods. Every turn felt like traveling through time, each mile marker a year we'd lost. I found myself taking the long way to her destination, desperate to stretch out this impossible reunion, terrified of what would happen when she stepped out of my car and disappeared from my life again. "I went to therapy," Sarah said suddenly. "Took me 15 years to start, but I finally did. Dr. Martinez helped me understand that survivor's guilt isn't rational, that loving someone doesn't make you responsible for saving them from themselves." She paused, and I heard her take a shaky breath. But understanding something intellectually and feeling it in your heart are two very different things. I nodded, recognizing the truth in her words. "I became a driver because I wanted to help people get home safely. Sounds stupid when I say it out loud, but every passenger I've picked up over the years, every safe arrival, it felt like maybe I was making up for the one time I wasn't there when it mattered most." "It's not stupid," she said firmly. "It's beautiful. It's exactly the kind of man David always said you were. He used to tell me that you were the most loyal person he'd ever known, that you'd do anything for the people you cared about." The mention of David's words about me broke something loose in my chest. I'd forgotten that he used to talk about me to Sarah, that in their private moments together, my name had come up in conversations I'd never been part of. It was a strange kind of immortality, knowing that some version of me had lived on in their relationship. "He was going to ask you to be his best man," I said, the memory surfacing like a bubble rising from deep water. "He'd been carrying around his grandmother's ring for weeks, planning the perfect proposal." Sarah's sharp intake of breath told me she hadn't known about the ring. "He never, we talked about marriage, but he never actually." Her voice trailed off, and I could see her reflection in the mirror, one hand pressed to her mouth. "He was terrified," I continued, the words flowing now like water through a broken dam. "Not of marrying you. He was terrified you'd say no. He used to practice the proposal on me, made me sit through it a dozen times. I kept telling him he was crazy, that anyone could see how much you loved him." "Where is it?" she asked quietly. "The ring? I have it." The admission surprised even me. I hadn't planned to tell her, hadn't even consciously decided to keep it all these years. After the funeral, his parents gave me some of his things. The ring was in his desk drawer, still in the little velvet box. I kept meaning to return it to his grandmother, but she passed away a few months later, and I couldn't let it go. We were getting close to her address now, the GPS showing only a few more turns. Panic began to rise in my chest. This couldn't be it. After 26 years of wondering, of carrying guilt and grief and unanswered questions, we couldn't just part ways again like strangers. "Sarah," I said, my voice urgent now, "I need you to know something. That last night before I left for the weekend, David seemed fine. We watched a movie, ordered pizza, talked about you. He was excited about graduation, about your future together. Whatever happened after I left, whatever darkness took hold of him, it wasn't something anyone could have predicted." She was quiet for a long moment, and when she finally spoke, her voice was thick with tears. "I know that now, but knowing it and forgiving myself and you took me a very long time." I turned onto Sarah's street, a quiet suburban lane lined with mature oak trees and well-maintained homes, the kind of neighborhood where families put down roots, where children rode bikes on sidewalks and neighbors knew each other's names. It was exactly the kind of place I'd always imagined she'd end up. Stable, peaceful, safe. "The blue house with the white shutters," she directed, pointing to a modest two-story colonial. I could see children's toys scattered across the front yard, a tricycle abandoned on the walkway, chalk drawings decorating the driveway. The sight hit me with unexpected force. Of course she had children. Of course she'd built a life, a family. What had I expected? "Beautiful home," I managed, pulling into the driveway. Through the front window, I could see warm light spilling out, the silhouette of someone moving around inside. Her husband, probably, the man who'd gotten to love her, marry her, build this life with her. I felt a stab of something that might have been jealousy, followed immediately by shame. "Michael," Sarah said, her hand on the door handle but not opening it yet, "I need you to understand something. When David died, I didn't just lose him. I lost you too. I lost our whole friend group, our shared future, everything we'd all planned together. You were collateral damage in my grief, and I'm sorry for that." "You don't need to apologize," I said quickly. "We both did what we had to do to survive. But I do need to apologize," she insisted, "because running away from you meant running away from the person who knew David best, who loved him almost as much as I did. I cheated us both out of the chance to heal together, to remember him together." The front door of the house opened, and a man stepped out onto the porch, tall, graying at the temples, wearing the concerned expression of a husband wondering why his wife was sitting in a stranger's car in their driveway. "That's Robert," Sarah said, following my gaze. "My husband." There was warmth in her voice when she said his name, a contentment that made my heart ache with a mixture of happiness and loss. "He knows about David, about you. I've told him our story, the whole story." Robert stepped off the porch and began walking toward the car, his expression shifting from concern to curiosity. He moved with the confidence of a man secure in his marriage, someone who trusted his wife completely. I found myself grateful for that, glad that Sarah had found someone who could love her without jealousy for her past. "Does he know you blame yourself?" I asked. "He knows I used to," she corrected. "He's the one who finally convinced me to go to therapy. Said he couldn't stand watching me carry around guilt that wasn't mine to carry." She smiled sadly. "He never knew David, but he loved him anyway, because David was part of me." Robert reached the car and tapped gently on the window. Sarah rolled it down, and I could see his face clearly now. Kind eyes, laugh lines, the weathered hands of someone who worked with them. He looked like the kind of man who fixed things, who made people feel safe. "Everything okay, honey?" he asked, his voice carrying just a hint of concern. "Robert, I'd like you to meet Michael Thompson," Sarah said. "David's best friend, the one I've told you about." The recognition in Robert's eyes was immediate. He'd heard my name before, knew my place in his wife's history. Instead of suspicion or awkwardness, his expression softened with something that looked like compassion. "Michael," he said, extending his hand through the window. "I feel like I know you already. Sarah's told me so much about you and David." Robert's handshake was firm and warm, the grip of a man who meant what he said. "I know this might sound strange," he continued, "but would you like to come in for coffee? Sarah's been carrying around a lot of stories about you and David for years. Maybe it's time some of them got told to someone who was actually there." I looked at Sarah in surprise. The invitation was unexpected, generous in a way that spoke to the kind of man she'd married. "I don't want to intrude," I said. "This is your family time. The kids are at my mother's for the night," Sarah said quickly. "And honestly, Michael, I don't think either of us is ready for this conversation to end. Not yet." There was something in her voice, a note of urgency that matched what I was feeling. 26 years of silence couldn't be undone in a 20-minute car ride. I turned off the engine, my hands still trembling slightly. "Are you sure? I mean, this is all so sudden, so unexpected." "Life's like that sometimes," Robert said with a gentle smile. "The important conversations usually are unexpected." He stepped back from the car. "Besides, I've been curious about David for years. Sarah lights up whenever she talks about the good times, the times before everything went wrong." As we walked toward the house, I found myself studying the details of Sarah's life. The carefully tended flower beds, the family photos visible through the windows, the children's artwork taped to the refrigerator. This was what healing looked like, I realized. Not the absence of grief, but the presence of new love, new purpose, new reasons to keep going. "Fair warning," Sarah said as Robert unlocked the front door. "There are pictures of David inside. I hope that's okay." She paused, her hand on my arm. "I never stopped loving him, Michael. Robert understands that. The heart doesn't work like that. It doesn't replace people. It just makes room for more." The inside of Sarah's home was warm and lived in, filled with the comfortable chaos of family life. Children's books were stacked on coffee tables, family photos covered the mantelpiece, and the lingering scent of dinner hung in the air. But what stopped me in my tracks was the small corner of the living room that was clearly dedicated to David's memory. A single framed photograph sat on a side table. David at 20, laughing at something off camera, his arm around Sarah's shoulders. Next to it was a small wooden box worn smooth with age and a single white candle. It wasn't a shrine exactly, more like a gentle acknowledgement of love that had been interrupted but never forgotten. "I lit the candle on his birthday," Sarah said quietly, noticing my gaze. "And on the anniversary. The kids know about Uncle David, know that Mommy loved him before she loved Daddy. They ask questions sometimes. Good questions." Robert moved to the kitchen, giving us space while he prepared coffee. I could hear him moving around, opening cabinets, running water, providing the soundtrack of normalcy, while Sarah and I navigated this emotional minefield. "What do you tell them?" I asked, settling into the couch across from David's photo. Even after all these years, seeing his face was like a punch to the gut. He looked so young, so alive, so completely unaware of the darkness that was waiting for him. "The truth mostly," Sarah said, sitting beside me, "that sometimes people get sick in ways we can't see, in ways that make them think the world would be better without them. That it's not anyone's fault when that happens, but it's everyone's job to watch out for each other." I nodded, thinking of all the passengers I'd driven over the years who'd seemed lost, hopeless, alone. How many times had I wondered if a kind word, a listening ear, might make the difference between someone making it home safely and not making it home at all. Robert returned with 3 steaming mugs, settling into the chair across from us with the easy grace of someone comfortable in his own home. "So, Michael," he said, "Sarah tells me you and David were roommates at State. What was he like back then?" The question caught me off guard. For 26 years, no one had asked me to remember David as he was, rather than as he'd become in those final, devastating moments. He was... I paused, searching for the right words. He was the kind of person who made everyone around him better, funnier, braver, more optimistic about the future. Sarah smiled, the first genuinely happy expression I'd seen from her all evening. "He used to call you his conscience," she said. "Said you kept him grounded when he got too carried away with his grand plans." "Grand plans," I repeated, laughing despite myself. "Remember when he decided he was going to start a business selling custom fortune cookies with personal messages? He had me helping him write fortunes for weeks." "Oh God, the fortune cookie phase," Sarah giggled, and for a moment she looked exactly like the 20-year-old girl I'd known. "He gave me one that said, 'Your future husband is sitting across from you wondering when you'll notice he's madly in love with you.' I thought it was so cheesy." "But you kept it," Robert observed with a knowing smile. "I kept it," Sarah confirmed. "It's in that wooden box, along with all his letters and a few other things." She looked at me meaningfully. "There's something else in there too. Something I've been carrying around for 26 years, waiting for the right moment to give back." My heart began to race. "Sarah." "What?" "The last letter he wrote," she said quietly. "The one they found on his desk. It wasn't a suicide note, Michael. It was a letter to you." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. "A letter to me." My voice came out as barely a whisper. "But the police said..." "They told me there was no note, no explanation. There wasn't a suicide note," Sarah said carefully. "But there was this letter, addressed to you, sealed in an envelope. His parents gave it to me after the funeral, along with some other personal things. I was supposed to give it to you, but when I couldn't face seeing you again..." She trailed off, but I understood. In her grief, in her need to escape everything that reminded her of David, she'd held onto the letter. For 26 years, she'd carried his final words to me, and I'd never known they existed. Robert leaned forward, his expression serious. "Sarah's been wrestling with this for months, ever since she decided to come back to town for her company's conference. She's been debating whether to try to find you, whether it was fair to disrupt your life after all these years. And then you just appeared," Sarah said wonderingly. "Like the universe decided it was time. When I saw you at that hotel pickup, I almost couldn't believe it. I'd been carrying around this letter, this piece of unfinished business, and suddenly there you were." My hands were shaking as Sarah rose and walked to the wooden box. She opened it carefully, reverently, and withdrew a sealed envelope. My name was written across the front in David's familiar handwriting. the same loose scrawl that had covered countless study notes and phone messages throughout our college years. "I don't know what it says," Sarah said, returning to the couch with the letter. "I never opened it. It wasn't meant for me." She held it out, and I stared at it as if it might burst into flames. "But Michael, I need you to know. Whatever it says, it doesn't change the fact that what happened wasn't your fault." I took the letter with trembling hands, feeling the weight of 26 years of unanswered questions in that single piece of paper. The envelope felt impossibly heavy in my hands, as if it contained not just paper and ink, but the weight of all the conversations David and I would never have, all the years of friendship that had been cut short. I turned it over, examining the seal that had remained unbroken for more than 2 decades. "I don't know if I can," I admitted, my voice barely audible. What if he was angry with me? What if he blamed me for something?" "Then you'll know," Robert said gently, "and knowing will be better than wondering." His words carried the wisdom of someone who'd watched his wife wrestle with her own unanswered questions for years. Sarah moved closer, her presence offering comfort without pressure. "David loved you, Michael. Whatever's in that letter, it comes from that love. I'm sure of it." I took a deep breath and carefully opened the envelope, unfolding the single sheet of paper inside. David's handwriting filled the page, not the frantic scrawl of someone in crisis, but his normal, measured script. The letter was dated the day before he died. "Mike," it began, and I could almost hear his voice saying my name. "I know you're going to blame yourself for this, and I need you to stop that right now. What I'm about to do isn't about you, isn't about Sarah, isn't about anything anyone could have prevented. It's about this darkness in my head that I can't shake, this feeling that I'm drowning even when I'm standing on dry land." Tears blurred my vision, but I continued reading. "I've been pretending to be okay for months now, maybe years. You know me better than anyone, and even you didn't see it. That's not because you weren't paying attention. It's because I got really good at hiding it." The letter continued, David's words reaching across the decades to finally answer the questions that had haunted me. But more than that, they were offering me something I'd never expected to receive: absolution. "I need you to take care of Sarah for me," the letter continued. "Not because it's your responsibility, but because she's going to blame herself too. And she's going to need someone who understands what we had together. She's going to need a friend who knew me before I got sick, who can remind her of the good times when the grief gets too heavy." I looked up at Sarah, seeing her through David's eyes, not just as the woman I'd lost touch with, but as someone he'd specifically entrusted to my care. The irony wasn't lost on me that we'd both spent 26 years carrying guilt he'd explicitly asked us not to carry. "There's more," Sarah said softly, seeing me pause. I returned to the letter. "I know you're going to want to fix this somehow, to find a way to make it make sense. That's who you are. You fix things, you take care of people, you carry everyone else's burdens like they're your own. But Mike, some things can't be fixed. Some darkness is too deep for friendship to reach, no matter how strong that friendship is." The words hit me like a physical blow. David had known me well enough to predict exactly how I'd react to his death, had taken the time to address my guilt before I'd even had the chance to feel it. It was perhaps the most generous thing anyone had ever done for me. "I'm writing this on Sunday night, and I know you'll be back from your parents' house on Tuesday. I'm sorry you're going to be the one to find me. I'm sorry for a lot of things, but I'm not sorry for the friendship we had. You made my life better, Mike. You made all of it better." The letter was signed simply David, followed by a postscript that made my heart stop. "P.S. The ring is in my desk drawer. Make sure Sarah gets it someday, when she's ready to remember the good times instead of just this ending." I folded the letter carefully, my hands no longer shaking. For the first time in 26 years, I felt something that might have been peace. David had known. He'd understood exactly what his death would do to the people who loved him, and he'd tried, in his final hours, to spare us the worst of the guilt. "He mentions the ring," I said, looking at Sarah. "He wanted you to have it." "I know," she said quietly. "I figured that out over the years. But I also figured that if you'd wanted me to have it, you would have found a way to get it to me." I reached for my wallet, extracting a small key I'd carried for more than 2 decades. "Safety deposit box," I explained. "Downtown First National. I've been paying the fee for 26 years. Couldn't bring myself to open it or close it out. Robert watched this exchange with fascination, clearly understanding that he was witnessing the resolution of something that had been decades in the making. "Sarah," he said gently, "maybe it's time." She nodded slowly. "Maybe it is." Then she looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "But I don't want to go alone. Michael, would you come with me tomorrow?" The request surprised me. After 26 years of separation, she was asking me to be part of this final piece of David's story. "Are you sure? I mean, it's such a personal thing." "David wanted us to take care of each other," she said, gesturing to the letter. "Maybe this is how we start." She paused, then added, "Besides, that ring represents a proposal that never happened, a future that got cut short. But it also represents hope, love, the belief that good things were possible. I think I'd like to remember it that way." I nodded, feeling something shift inside my chest. "Okay, yes, I'd like that." We sat in comfortable silence for a while, the three of us processing the magnitude of what had just happened. Outside, the suburban evening was settling into darkness, porch lights flickering on up and down the street. Normal families doing normal things. Homework, bedtime stories, the quiet rituals of daily life. It struck me how much I'd missed by isolating myself in my grief, how many connections I'd avoided out of fear of losing someone else. "Can I ask you something?" Robert said, breaking the silence. "What have you been doing all these years, besides driving, I mean?" "Sarah always wondered if you'd gotten married, had kids, built a life for yourself." The question stung because the answer felt so inadequate. "I kept moving," I said honestly. "Different cities, different jobs, always driving. I told myself I was seeing the country, meeting people, having adventures. But really, I think I was just running from the idea of putting down roots anywhere. Because roots mean vulnerability," Sarah observed. "They mean having something to lose again." Exactly. I was grateful she understood. Every time I started to get close to someone, to build something real, I'd find a reason to leave. It was easier than risking another loss like David. Robert leaned forward, his expression thoughtful. "But you kept the ring all these years. You kept paying for that safety deposit box. That doesn't sound like someone who was completely running away." His observation caught me off guard. I'd never thought about the ring as anything other than a burden I couldn't set down. But he was right. Keeping it, maintaining it, protecting it, those were acts of hope, not despair. "Maybe," I said slowly, "I was waiting for this moment without knowing it, waiting for the chance to complete David's last request." Sarah smiled, and for the first time all evening, it reached her eyes. Maybe we both were. "The bank opens at 9, I said, suddenly practical. "I could pick you up around 8:30. "Actually," Sarah said, exchanging a look with Robert, "why don't you stay for dinner tomorrow? After we go to the bank, I mean. The kids will be back and I'd like them to meet you. I'd like them to hear stories about David from someone who knew him." The invitation was unexpected and terrifying. Children meant noise, chaos, the kind of messy family life I'd been avoiding for decades. But it also meant belonging, connection, the chance to be part of something larger than my own carefully controlled solitude. "I don't know," I said hesitantly. "Kids make me nervous. I'm not really the uncle type." "David would have been," Sarah said softly. "He would have been the kind of uncle who taught them card tricks and told them stories and snuck them extra dessert when their parents weren't looking." The image she painted was so vivid, so achingly real, that I could almost see it. David, graying at the temples like the rest of us, surrounded by children who adored him. The life he should have had, would have had, if his brain hadn't betrayed him. He would have, I agreed. He would have been amazing with kids. "Then maybe," Robert suggested gently, "you could be that uncle for him. Not as a replacement, but as a way of honoring what he would have wanted." The idea settled into my chest like a seed finding fertile ground. For 26 years, I'd been trying to make up for not saving David by keeping strangers safe on the road. But maybe there was another way to honor his memory, by being present for the people he'd loved, by helping to keep his story alive for a new generation. "Okay," I said, the word coming out stronger than I'd expected. "Yes, I'd like that very much." I barely slept that night, lying in my small apartment staring at the ceiling, David's letter on the nightstand beside me. Every few hours, I'd reach over and touch the paper, making sure it was real, that this entire evening hadn't been some elaborate dream born of loneliness and regret. At 7 a.m., I was already dressed and pacing, too nervous to eat breakfast. The safety deposit box key felt hot in my pocket, like it was burning through the fabric. For 26 years, that key had been a burden, a reminder of promises unkept and futures unlived. Today, it would finally serve its purpose. I arrived at Sarah's house at exactly 8:30, my hands freshly washed and my shirt pressed. Through the front window, I could see her moving around inside, and I wondered if she'd slept any better than I had. This was a big day for both of us, the kind of day that would either provide closure or tear open wounds we'd spent decades trying to heal. She emerged before I could knock, dressed simply in jeans and a sweater, her hair pulled back in a ponytail that made her look younger. "Ready?" she asked, though her voice carried the same nervous energy I was feeling. "As ready as someone can be for something like this," I replied, opening the passenger door for her. It felt strange having her in the front seat instead of the back, like we were partners in this mission, rather than driver and passenger. The drive to the bank was quiet, both of us lost in our own thoughts. I found myself taking the same route I'd driven yesterday, as if retracing our steps might help us make sense of the impossible coincidence that had brought us back together. "Michael," Sarah said as we pulled into the bank parking lot, "whatever we find in that box, whatever condition the ring is in after all these years, I want you to know that this, yesterday, today, this conversation, it's already given me more peace than I've had in decades." First National Bank looked exactly the same as it had 26 years ago. All marble floors and brass fixtures, the kind of institutional permanence that made it seem like the perfect place to store things that mattered. The safety deposit box area was in the basement, accessed through a heavy vault door that required 2 keys, mine and the bank's. The clerk, a young woman who couldn't have been born when I'd first rented the box, led us through the process with professional efficiency. "Box 247, she announced, sliding the metal container across the table toward us. "I'll give you privacy. Just ring the bell when you're finished." Alone in the small room, Sarah and I stared at the box as if it might contain explosives. In a way, it did. Emotional. The silence in that hospital room stretched between us like a chasm filled with 23 years of unspoken words. Margaret's breathing was shallow, each rise and fall of her chest a reminder of how fragile this moment was. I found myself studying her face, searching for traces of the vibrant woman who had once filled our home with laughter and the scent of her perfume. "I need you to know," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the hum of medical equipment, "that leaving you both was the hardest thing I ever did. But staying would have destroyed all of us." Her eyes, once so bright and full of life, now held a depth of sorrow that made my chest ache. I was drowning, Michael, in my own mind, in expectations I couldn't meet, in a version of myself I could never be. The words I had rehearsed for years, the angry accusations and demands for explanations dissolved on my tongue. This wasn't the confrontation I had imagined. This was a woman facing her mortality, trying to make peace with choices that had haunted her for decades. "You could have gotten help," I managed to say, though the words lacked the venom I had once imagined they would carry. "Help wasn't what it is now," she replied, a sad smile crossing her lips. "Mental health, postpartum depression, anxiety disorders, these weren't conversations people had in 2001. I was just labeled as selfish, as a bad mother who couldn't handle her responsibilities." Her hand trembled as she reached toward me, stopping just short of touching my arm. "I thought you'd be better without me." The revelation hit me like a physical blow. All these years, I had constructed a narrative of abandonment, of a mother who simply didn't love us enough to stay. But sitting here, seeing the pain etched in every line of her face, I began to understand that her leaving might have been an act of love, however misguided it seemed. "Tell me about Sarah," Margaret said suddenly, her voice gaining strength. "Tell me about the daughter I never got to know." The request caught me off guard, and I felt a familiar protective instinct rise within me. For years, Sarah's questions about her grandmother had been met with carefully constructed half-truths and gentle redirections. I pulled out my phone, scrolling through photos with hands that shook slightly. "She's incredible," I began, showing her a picture from Sarah's college graduation. "She studied psychology, actually. Says she wants to help families stay together." The irony wasn't lost on either of us, and I saw Margaret's eyes fill with tears as she studied her granddaughter's face. "She has your father's eyes," Margaret whispered. "But that smile, that's mine. I used to practice that exact smile in the mirror when I was her age, trying to convince myself I was happy." She traced the phone screen gently with her fingertip, as if she could somehow reach through the glass and touch the granddaughter she'd never met. "Does she know about me?" The question hung in the air like smoke. "She knows you exist," I admitted, "but I've never told her the whole story. I didn't know the whole story myself until tonight." I scrolled to another photo, this one of Sarah volunteering at a women's shelter. She works with mothers in crisis. It's like she was born to heal the kind of pain you went through. Margaret closed her eyes, and for a moment I thought she had fallen asleep. But then she spoke, her voice barely a whisper. "I wrote her letters, hundreds of them over the years. Birthday cards, Christmas wishes, advice for a granddaughter I'd never meet. They're all in a box in my apartment. I never sent them because I didn't think I had the right." Her confession opened another wound I didn't know existed, the realization that love had persisted even in absence. The night deepened around us, and the hospital corridors grew quiet except for the soft padding of nurses' shoes and the distant beep of monitors. Margaret had dozed off briefly, and I found myself watching her sleep, this stranger, who was my mother, trying to reconcile the woman before me with the ghost that had haunted my childhood. When she woke, her eyes were clearer, more focused. "I need to ask you something," she said, struggling to sit up straighter, "and I need you to be honest with me. Do you think Sarah would want to meet me? Not now, not like this, but..." She gestured weakly at the medical equipment surrounding her. "I don't have much time left, Michael. The cancer has spread everywhere." The weight of her question settled on my shoulders like a heavy coat. How could I make that decision for Sarah? How could I not? "I think," I said carefully, "that she deserves the chance to decide for herself. But Margaret, you need to understand. She might say no. She might not be ready for this kind of complexity in her life." "I know," she nodded, a single tear sliding down her cheek. "But if there's even a small chance, I have so much I want to tell her. About her grandfather, about family history, about the strength that runs in our bloodline, about how sorry I am that my brokenness affected her life before she was even born." I thought about Sarah, about her fierce independence and her deep capacity for empathy, about how she had always seemed to carry a sadness that didn't quite belong to her generation, as if she had inherited grief along with her DNA. "There's something else you should know," I said quietly. "Sarah struggles with anxiety, has since she was a teenager. She's getting help for it, but..." Margaret's face crumpled. "It's genetic, isn't it?" The thing that broke me, I passed it down to her. The anguish in her voice was raw, primal. Even in leaving, I couldn't protect her from myself. The realization seemed to physically pain her, and I watched as she grappled with this new layer of guilt and regret. "Actually," I found myself saying, surprising us both, "her anxiety led her to therapy, which led her to her career, which led her to helping other people. Maybe what you see as a curse, she's turned into a gift." I showed her another photo, Sarah speaking at a conference about maternal mental health. "She's become an advocate for exactly the kind of understanding you needed 23 years ago." Margaret stared at the photo for a long time, her expression cycling through wonder, pride, and profound sadness. "She's trying to fix what I broke," she whispered. "Not just in our family, but in the world." The recognition seemed to both comfort and devastate her. "I don't deserve to meet someone that remarkable." "Maybe it's not about deserving," I heard myself say, the words coming from some deeper part of myself I didn't recognize. "Maybe it's about healing, for all of us." The admission felt foreign in my mouth. This suggestion of forgiveness I hadn't known I was capable of. Sarah has always felt like something was missing. She's never said it directly, but I can see it in her eyes sometimes. The conversation was interrupted by a nurse checking Margaret's vitals, and in that brief interlude, I found myself texting Sarah. Not about the situation, that conversation needed to happen in person, but just a simple, "I love you, sweetheart. Hope your day was good." Her response came quickly. "Love you too, Dad. Something feels different today. Good different. Can't explain it." When the nurse left, Margaret was watching me with knowing eyes. "You texted her, didn't you?" she asked. "I can see it in your face. You have the same expression your father used to get when he was thinking about people he loved." The observation caught me off guard. This glimpse into a version of my father I had never known, seen through the eyes of a woman who had loved him before I was old enough to understand what love meant. As dawn approached, painting the hospital room in soft grey light, Margaret seemed to gain a second wind. She began talking about my father, sharing memories I had never heard. "He used to sing to you," she said, a genuine smile crossing her face for the first time that night. Terribly off-key, but with such love. "He'd pace the hallway at 2 a.m., bouncing you and singing old Beatles songs until you fell asleep." These glimpses into my early childhood, seen through her eyes, felt like recovering lost treasure. "He never remarried," I told her. "Said he'd had his great love and lightning doesn't strike twice in the same place." The information seemed to both comfort and pain her, another layer of consequences she had to carry. "I'm glad," she whispered. "Not because I wanted him to be alone, but because it means what we had was real, that it mattered, even though I destroyed it." She turned toward the window, watching the sun begin its slow rise over the city. "I've had relationships over the years, but nothing that lasted. How could it? I was always running from myself." The morning shift change brought new energy to the hospital, and with it, the reality that I would need to make decisions soon. About Margaret's revelation, about Sarah, about what came next. "If I arrange for Sarah to meet you," I said slowly, "you need to promise me something. You can't disappear again. Whatever time you have left, if she chooses to be part of it, you have to see it through." Margaret's eyes filled with fresh tears, but her voice was steady when she replied, "I promise. I've spent 23 years running, Michael. I don't have the strength left to run anymore, even if I wanted to." She reached out again, and this time I didn't pull away when her fingers brushed mine. "But you need to promise me something too. If this goes badly, if meeting me hurts her more than helps her, you'll protect her from me, even if it means cutting contact again." The weight of that promise settled between us, heavy with the recognition that love sometimes means letting go, even when holding on is what your heart desperately wants. By mid-morning, I found myself standing in the hospital parking lot, phone in hand, staring at Sarah's contact information. The conversation with Margaret had left me emotionally drained but strangely lighter, as if a weight I hadn't realized I was carrying had been lifted. The anger that had sustained me for so many years felt different now. Not gone, but transformed into something more complex and ultimately more human. I called Sarah, and when she answered, her voice was bright with curiosity. "Dad, you never call this early. Is everything okay?" How could I explain that everything was both completely wrong and somehow more right than it had been in decades? "Sarah, I need to tell you something important. Can you come over today? It's about your grandmother." The silence on the other end of the line stretched for several heartbeats. "My grandmother is dead, Dad. You told me she died when I was little." Her voice carried a note of confusion mixed with something that might have been hope. "Unless, Dad, what aren't you telling me? She's not dead, sweetheart. She's very sick, but she's alive, and she's here. I know this is a shock, and I know you probably have 1,000 questions. I'll explain everything when you get here, but Sarah..." I paused, trying to find words for the impossible. "She wants to meet you, but only if you want to meet her. No pressure, no expectations." When Sarah arrived 2 hours later, her face was a mixture of excitement, fear, and barely contained emotion. We sat in my living room, the same room where I had fielded her childhood questions about family with careful half-truths, and I told her everything. About Margaret's struggles, about her leaving, about the chance encounter in the rideshare that had brought us back together. "She wrote me letters?" Sarah asked, tears streaming down her face. "All these years, I thought she just didn't care about me at all." The pain in her voice was familiar. It was the same ache I had carried for decades, the wound left by perceived abandonment. Can I see them? Can I meet her? As we drove to the hospital together, Sarah's hand gripped mine tightly. I'm scared, Dad, she admitted. What if I don't like her? What if she doesn't like me? What if this makes everything more complicated? I squeezed her hand, thinking about how love always makes things more complicated, but also infinitely more worthwhile. If this story has touched your heart, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us continue sharing these powerful human stories that remind us we're all more connected than we know. The meeting between Sarah and Margaret was nothing like I had imagined it would be. There were tears, yes, but also laughter. Sarah's natural warmth and Margaret's desperate gratitude created an immediate, if fragile, connection. Watching them together, I could see the family resemblance not just in their faces, but in their gestures, their expressions, the way they both tucked their hair behind their left ear when they were thinking. Margaret lived for 3 more months after that day, 3 months during which Sarah visited regularly, during which old wounds began to heal and new relationships took root. It wasn't a fairy tale reconciliation. There were difficult conversations, moments of anger and frustration, times when the weight of lost years felt overwhelming. But there was also grace and forgiveness, and the recognition that families are messy, complicated things that don't always follow the scripts we write for them. The box of letters Margaret had written became Sarah's most treasured possession. 23 years of love, expressed in words that were never sent but always felt. Sarah read them slowly, savoring each one, finding in them the grandmother she had always imagined but never dared hope for. She knew me, Sarah told me one day, holding a letter Margaret had written on Sarah's 16th birthday. Somehow, she knew exactly who I was. When Margaret passed, it was peacefully, with both Sarah and me holding her hands. Her final words were thank you, not to us, but to the universe, for giving her the chance to know her granddaughter and to make peace with her son. The funeral was small, attended by the few people Margaret had allowed into her life during her years away, but it was filled with love and the recognition that redemption is possible, even in the final chapters of our stories. 6 months later, Sarah started a support group for families affected by maternal mental health issues. She calls it Letters Never Sent, and it's become her way of honoring both the grandmother she found and the years they lost. As for me, I've learned that forgiveness isn't a destination, but a journey, and that sometimes the most profound healing comes from the most unexpected encounters. That rideshare trip changed everything, not because it erased the past, but because it gave us permission to write a different ending. Sometimes the people we think we've lost forever are just waiting for us to find them again, in the most ordinary moments of our most ordinary days. If this story has moved you, please like this video and share it with someone who might need to hear it. And remember to comment below. We'd love to hear about your own experiences with family, forgiveness, and second chances. Thank you for listening.